Hi, my name is Corey Moak. I'm the Games Product Specialist here at Alias Wavefront. This tape you'll be watching is based on a presentation I gave at GDC. It covers all the new and exciting features in Maya 3 for game development. I hope you enjoy the tape. In this section we'll be looking at texturing models in Maya. So we'll start by creating shaders and textures. From there we'll move into Paint Effects to paint textures, and then move into Artisan Paint with 3D texture painting. Throughout this time we'll be covering the UV tools for laying out the UVs and setting up the proper placement of them. This is a character that I created for GDC this past year, and what we'll be looking at is some of the texturing. Now this was originally done in 2.5, but we'll be looking at the new tools in 3.0, which actually offer some really nice options for improved workflow and getting things done. What we'll start with is texturing this sword here. So I'm going to display hide unselected objects, duplicate it, and move it upwards. So we can take a look at both of them there. And what I want to do is open up the Hypershade window. And these are all the materials that I have in the scene and textures and whatnot. This is the original file texture that I used in the bottom version of the model here. So we've got the handle and we've got the blade sections of it. What I'm going to do is start from scratch here. So we'll get a new blend shader, and I can just drag and drop that onto here to assign it. And this button here will graph the up and downstream connections, so I can sort of clear out the information that I'm not wanting to see. So I'm going to come in here a little closer, and I'm taking a cloud texture and assigning it here. We'll take this procedural texture and convert it into a file texture. So I'm going to double click on here and adjust my color one, the black, to get more of a steel gray look with it. And maybe we can actually bring that white down a little bit. So that's not too bad right now. Now what I want to do is regraph this again, because I want to actually get in and adjust the 3D texture here. So if I go to Show, I can turn on my textures, which is this piece down here. And as I scale that, we can see that that texture changes on the model in different directions depending on how I scale it. And I can also move that around until I get a nice sort of orientation on the blade, maybe even rotate it a little bit. So something like that will be sufficient for now. Now what I want to do is select the blend and the blade piece of geometry and do a convert to file texture. So in the Hypershade under Edit, select Convert to File Texture. I'm going to use anti-aliasing with a resolution of 256 by 256. This other line here is Bake Shading Group Lighting, and what that will allow you to do is take the lighting in the scene and apply it to the texture. So this is one way to get pre-lighting accomplished. Right now I'm not worried about that. I just want this texture by itself. So convert the texture, and this just takes a moment. It converts that procedural texture into a file and writes it to your disk. So here it is, and this is the new one here, so let's just graph that, and you can see basically we've got the blend and the file texture here that's assigned to it. So with that, now we can take this a step further and actually do some paint effects to manipulate the textures on it. For paint effects, I've split the Maya UI into two windows here. So I have my perspective window over here, and I have the paint effects window over here. You can get to that by going to Panels, Panel, and Paint Effects. Now, by default, Paint Effects comes up in 3D mode. Right now, we're not really interested in that. What we want to do is paint in 2D. So go to Paint and Paint Canvas. That allows us to paint in 2D. And here's sort of a shot of the window. Now what I want to do is go back to the Hypershade window that I had before, and somewhere down here is my file texture, there it is, of the blade. So I can just take that with the middle mouse button and drag it and drop it into the canvas. And then I can zoom in here as I need to. So I'm going to close the hypershade up for now. And I'm just going to manipulate this texture using the Paint Effects brushes. So with Paint Effects, what you should do when following this workflow is first to turn autosave on. Basically what that will do is after every stroke you make, it will save the file and update it for your display, so it looks like you've got the painting happening interactively. And to select a brush, you can go to Window Visor. This is just the left-hand portion of the hypershade window, and pop open the brushes section. So you can see there's lots of brushes here, and if you pop open any of these, there's a lot more in there. Now, to paint by default, you can just press this brush icon, and that'll open the Paint Effects brush settings, and I can just start painting with that brush. Okay, and that's based on the color that I have up here. I'm just going to do a canvas undo, and again change the color to something else. The other color chip here, that controls the transparency in the scene. So what we'll do is actually add some blood to this, and I'll do it actually using a food brush. Over to the right here, we've got a couple raw meat brushes here. I'm just going to select the first raw meat and come over to Paint Effects and just take a practice stroke to see how that looks. So that's at a pretty good thickness. If it was too big or too small, I would use that template brush icon up here to change the size of this. So we'll do a canvas undo, and I'm just going to spread this out a little bit more so I can see the transparency slider. I need this fairly transparent so that the blood covers over there. That's a little too much. And that's a little too little. So somewhere in the middle there, take a little bit of tweaking. And then I can just drag this on there and start putting a couple strokes on there, and I should actually get this out of the way. And you can see that as I drew those strokes, it's updating on the brush. Or, sorry, on the sword itself. So let's put some more blood on the tip of the sword here and maybe get a couple sections through here. So we've got a nice bloody sword here. Get a little, maybe more down at the tip. Now the next thing we can do is actually get some texture for the handle of the sword itself. So once again, in here selecting a brush to work with, I've got something in here that should be pretty good for starters. I'll use one of these wicker tubes. And this one I think is going to be too small, so I'll pop that open and drag that across. So that's a pretty good size for the handle. So I'm just going to drag that across the top and do another section through here. Okay, and if I wanted, I could get in here and get a blur brush or smear brush to tweak that out a little bit more, but I think for this it should be fine. So that's, you know, based on the resolution and everything. So I'll go back to the hypershade window, and I need to find my new blade and just drag and drop that onto the handle, and there it is, completed. And that's the sort of general overview of Paint Effects. I can show you a couple more things with that that are actually quite relevant for creating textures in a game environment. The first one is the pixel brush. Let me turn autosave off just so I don't overwrite this texture anymore. So pixel brush, and this white color should show up okay. So I can actually paint single pixels on my texture, and I can get in really close and see where those pixels are, so I can manipulate that quite fine. You see I've got some transparency on there still, so I'm sort of getting layers on top. Now, another thing to point out is the wrap canvas horizontally and vertically. Turning these two on and turning my pixel brush off, and I want to reset this template brush. So I could get in here and actually change these settings or switch to the rendering menu, paint effects, and select reset template brush. So that brings it back to a normal size, and I'll just pick a bright color here where it's obvious what I'm doing. And now as I drag this stroke across, you see that it wraps across there. So I can line these things up and get a nice tiling texture if my aim is correct as I come across the edges. We can take this even a step further with canvas roll, and you can roll that horizontally or vertically. And I've got a little bit of a display problem here, which shouldn't be happening, but is nonetheless. I guess it's okay for this example because with that roll there, what I can do then is start to adjust that edge on the texture so that it is smooth, so it's tileable, as opposed to this where there's a seam and not easy to adjust. So I would just do that with the tools that I've already shown you here. Now what we'll do is start looking at the UV mapping on this character. So I've got a split view here once again. This time I've got the texture view window on the left half and the character on the right half in shaded mode. So when I select the piece of geometry, you can see the texture map here, and right now it's sort of wrapping infinitely through there. We can adjust this with the image range. And I'm just going to set the minimum and maximum values to 0 and 1 and apply that, so there we just have it once. We don't have it wrapping infinitely. And we can do some other things like turning the grid off just so it's easier to see what's happening. And this was done originally in 2.5, so the texture map here might not exactly match up with the way we lay out the UVs this time, but for the purposes of demonstrating this, it should work out fairly well. So once again, I will hide unselected objects, and we can just see the rider here, and you can see what I did initially, how I cheated on the head and stuff, because that's covered with the helmet, so those UVs weren't really sorted out. Now what I'm going to do is just start by applying a new map to him to just sort of wipe this out, and you know, we can assume that these texture coordinates are no good for us right now. So switch back to modeling and edit polygons texture, and the first thing we can do is apply mapping in a sort of typical manner. We've got planar, cylindrical mapping, or spherical mapping, and we can also do that based on camera, so sort of the projection that the camera's in will work like a planar projection type of thing. I'm just going to do a planar map from the default setting there, and this projects from the side. So what I want to do is take that and, oops, got the wrong thing there. Let's just undo and reapply it. So there it is. Now you can see the icon around here. This one will scale, the corner ones scale based on the corner. Let me turn the image off so we can see the UVs. Okay, so that scales sort of in both directions, and then you've got the horizontal and vertical ones to work in that way. Now this cross down at the bottom here will switch to the manipulator that you would recognize from the extrude tools, and we can take this and rotate it around, and I've actually got the coordinates in here so I can make that straight on, and again adjust that, and I can either do it through the texture view window or in the UI itself. So I can take that and start getting it to fit in space as I need it to. Now, based on that, the texturing is not going to be very good. It's sort of a mishmash all over the image, but we'll fix that right now. So there's a lot of new texturing tools in Maya. The first one we'll look at is the Layout UVs tool right here, and basically what this does is looks for the overlapping UV coordinates that we have here. So because this was a planar projection, you know, we've got the whole thing sort of doubled up on the arms, legs, through the torso and whatnot. So we can separate the mapping coordinates. We can flip them if we need to. So we've got that turned on by default. And then we can lay out either no layout along U or into a square. Into the square is generally the best, so we'll do it that way. And we can also adjust the scaling when we do that. So that's what this first section does, basically all the layout of it. The bottom section has two options, and that relates to the texture map that you're using based on how far apart it puts the UV coordinates. It tries to, based on the map size you're using here, keep at least 1 pixel of separation between the UV coordinates so that you don't get smearing between different areas of map. Now, if you wanted to use custom settings, then you can adjust the percentage space on your own. So we'll just lay out the UVs, and you can see what it did here. Let me turn the image back off, is to lay that out into a lot of different pieces. Now, we've got some fairly big chunks in there, but there's also some small scattered ones in here. So those ones could be a bit of a problem to put together, particularly if we didn't have the new texturing tool that's called Move and Sew UVs. Now, this one is a great tool. It helps a lot. Basically, it will move any edges that you've selected to edges on the larger piece of geometry. And you can do this based on just what you have selected. That's what this state does. Or you can limit the piece size and then say based on a number of faces. So if I set this down to maybe 6 faces and select edges in the window here, I'm just going to drag select everything and press apply. You can see that that takes most of those small pieces and fits them together for me. Okay, I've got a few chunks here and there, but it's a lot better than it was initially. And you know, those 2 steps could have taken a lot longer in versions previous to this. Now, the next thing I might do is just grab the faces on the boots here and start to lay that out. I just wanted to see that I've got everything here. Okay, so I'm going to take that and do a planar projection again. So that adjusts the boots. And you see how that there was broken pieces here in the boots. That doing that planar projection puts all those pieces back together. So I'll just redo that. And then I can take this and adjust it down to a good boot size and maybe move it off to the side here. Or I could turn the texture on and actually try and fit them directly to that portion of the image now. So that's pretty close. I could work on adjusting this a little bit more, but for my purposes, I think that's fine. So there we have the new adjustment on the boots. So that works out pretty good. So next thing we want to do is start to put the rest of these pieces together. I can take these, let's undo that and go to UV mode. I'm just going to move the arms out of the way here. So I can just select a few UVs on them and then do a select shell. And I'm just going to move them off into space here. What I want to do for starters is to select the jacket components and get them in the proper place. So I selected this one and I just wanted to see where that was. So that's the back part. So I'll select that shell and move it up to fit in here. And you can see that that is actually flipped. The text is going backwards. Maybe hard to read on your TV, but that's what's happening. So I'm going to just do Edit, Flip UVs, and make sure that that flips across the horizontal direction. So apply and close, flips that, and now that should be more readable. So we'll do the same thing with the jacket and move that up into space here. And what I'd like to do is just cut the bottom of the pants off of the jacket. So I'm going to turn the image off once again and get in here and select edges on the jacket. Okay, so that's the bottom part of the jacket there, just checking in the modeling window to make sure I'm selecting in the right place. And I can either select these edges on the model or in the texture view window itself. So this edge I'll grab there, and that should be all of them. So what I'll do is Edit, Cut UVs. So along those edges should break that. And if I select those UVs and select the shell, looks like my cut didn't work. I have another little edge down in here, perhaps. So what I can do is try and get in here and clean that up. Because of that little area there, it's a little hard to tell what's going on. So I'll select the UVs in this region here, and may as well take these ones as well. And in the texture menu, there's another tool called Relax UVs. And basically this works on a selection you make, either the UV border or the selected UVs or unselected UVs. In this case, I want to pin the unselected UVs, okay, and relax these ones in that area. So let's apply that. And you can see that that takes that out and cleans it up so they're not tangled or overlapping on each other. And I'll just pull that back so it's a little bit closer to where it was. So again, I can select the edges through here. And just continue selecting the edges across the bottom of the jacket here. And it looks like I took a wrong turn. That one will be in the correct place. So I want to swap these here. And do my cut UVs one more time. Select the UVs down here, select the shell, and you can see that that's broken apart there. So there's the bottom portion of the pants. Now, what I might actually do with this is just to select the UVs here on the jacket, select the shell, and do a little bit more of the relaxing on there. So I can give it a couple times through there just to move that down a little bit. So, same thing could be done with the top of the jacket, or the front of the jacket and the bottom of the pants. The arms, I can just quite easily select those shells and move them so that they're overlapping. And drag them across there. Select all those shells and just turn the image back on. I want to rotate those around about 90 degrees. Move them down into here. With the pants, select that shell. Move them down here. So we'll just take this section here and move it up over to here. Just get it out of the way for now. And what I want to do is just adjust the face a little bit here. So select that shell, move it up here, scale it up to fit. Probably scale it up a bit further. And this is a good place to actually relax those UVs. Oh, and I got relaxed a little bit too much there, so let's undo that and make sure I've got pin UV border turned on and apply that. So that fits it a little bit better to the face. We've also got this back section here. And this really isn't even important because it's all just the back of the head. These UVs here are the chest, so they can just go up into this space here. So let's close that down. And that's the basic gist of getting this guy done here. Now again, I could cut that through there and pull that down onto the other parts of the pants and make this fit a little bit more appropriately there, but I think that covers most of that fairly well. So the next thing we'll do is switch to the bike model and do a little bit of texturing on that. So now we'll look at a couple more texturing tools with the bike. what we'll do is just work on the skull itself. So once again, I'm going to display hide unselected objects. We can look at that a little more closely here. I can see we've got a bunch of interesting sort of nooks and crannies in here that might make it a little harder to texture. And right now the texture is definitely a mess. So what we'll do is texture, and this time we're going to use the new automatic mapping function. And what this does is works on a series of planes that you can project, and the different numbers will sort of project differently from sort of different shaped primitive objects. We'll take the default setting of 6, and then you can optimize either the distortion of the projection or fewer pieces that you want to work with. You've got the same layout tools that we saw with the layout UV tools, and the same spacing presets that we had with the layout UV tool as well. So the other option here is the create new UV set. And what you can do in version 3 of Maya is actually, through this whole section of the menu here, is work with multiple UVs on an object. So you can create new UV sets with whatever you do, and just UVs for different sets of texturing, whether it's, you might want to have a different UV map for the bump versus the color. So we can create a new UV set when we do this, and why don't we label that auto map and project this. Okay, so we get a fairly good breakdown there. This was a lot simpler piece of geometry than we had previous, but we do have still a lot of small chunks in here that we can work at putting together. So as we did before, we can select edges and do the move and sew, and we'll limit the piece size. I'm going to start small, so we've got some single pieces, and just move those into place. So with that done, we can just select a couple of the UVs and grab some shells and just start moving those around to just make this a little cleaner to look at. And that's pretty good. So once again, let's select the edges, and we'll limit the piece size this time to 3 and apply it. So that should take care of most of the pieces through there. There may be some smaller ones that we still want to deal with, but we can sort of do those on a case-by-case basis. So let's close this and start taking a look more closely what's happening here. It looks like this chunk right here is the opening of the face there. So let's select that shell and move it over here. Now you can see that we're missing the inside section, so we could grab those edges there and try and attach them up properly. So I just want to attach those in through that region. So I'm going to deselect all the other edges that might be associated with. Okay, so it's just those pieces. And we should be able to, once again, move and sew. So this time I'm not concerned about the piece size. And that puts that into shape there. Now we've got the bottom part of the mouth here that needs to be attached. So it's just a matter of finding out which piece that is. We could select a face, and that'll show where it is. So I guess what is happening is that we're looking at these UVs upside down. Let's just grab all of those. Okay, so we've got most of the front of the face here. Let's just flip that vertically. And then find the edges that apply here. So select those, and there they are. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now this one's beginning to look a little bit messy, so good point to select the shell and relax the UVs. So you see how that fixes that up, and then we can actually maybe scale this so it looks more like the face we're dealing with. Now this section has a lot of overlap in it, and that's the back side of the jaw, which we're not too concerned about, but could be worth relaxing anyways. So let's apply that so that piece is sorted out. Top of the head is here, so we can grab those edges and see where they match up. So we could actually attach those into one big piece, which maybe is not the best idea. It might be better to actually select those edges there, cut, and then take these edges and sew them into place across there. And just make sure we have nothing else selected. To be safe, we can do it this way. And do the same thing here, G key to repeat what's happening. This edge at the bottom should line up. Okay, so that's lining up over here, so we can take that piece, cut it, and apply that one into place. These UVs here make one shell that's also attached to the top of the head, so that makes sense to attach those in here. So let's grab those edges and find out which ones they are. Deselect from there, and we don't need these interior edges attached, so let's apply that. I'm going to undo that, and before I do this, just flip those vertically. So again, grab those edges, deselect at the top, and apply. So there we've got a better shape on the skull. And I think this is in good shape now to start painting. We may want to relax these UVs down here. So something like that. And we can figure out a way to maximize the texture space here. So if I turn the image, turn the display image back on, we can actually take this and start to adjust the space as we'd like. So we want the most on the front of the character. The back two pieces, we could actually take this shell here, and because it's just the opposite side, we could flip it over and move it into that space so that they're sharing the same texture coordinates. But what we're going to do here is something a little different, so we'll keep those two independent of each other, but move them so that they do line up. So, select those shells, move them down into here. And these shells we can move up to the top. Now, maybe not the most efficient use of the texture space, but it looks like it'll get the job done for what we need to do here. One other thing we might do is just take these edges here and here and cut those. Just move them into their own space here. could actually find out which those pieces are working with. So I'll just deselect here and here. Maybe better if I work on one piece at a time. So we grab those edges, and okay, so that fits right in there. Still got move and sew open, so we'll put that in there. And we could convert that selection to a face to try and scale it down, or convert it to the UVs more appropriately. So under Edit Polygons Selection, we can convert to UVs. Just go into Scale mode here. And move it up like that, and find out where these pieces get attached as well. So I don't need it there, and they could move up into this section as well. So let's apply that. So this could, both of these guys could be relaxed here one more time. Okay, so that's good. I guess while we're at it, we may as well be picky. Cut that, select those edges, and attach them up at that point there. Okay, that gets those laid out fairly well. Now I'd like to show one more tool here. If I look at this map here, it could be sort of maximized a little bit more. One way to handle this would be to normalize it. So we could select those faces, Control select those ones, and actually do a normalize so that it fits it right into a square. From this point, we can then select the UVs, or a couple of UVs, select the shell, and just scale that and move it down into the UV space as we need it. Now, you remember previously that I had set up the multiple UVs on here. If you select over the model with the right mouse button, you've got UV sets. We've got the auto map that we prepared, or the map 1. And you can switch back and forth between these through this window or through the image section of the texture view window and the UV sets. So that's that. Now what we'd like to do is actually demonstrate how this can be used more effectively. So the way to see this is through a shader. So if we create a new blend, for example, and a layered texture on top for the color, we can take that and assign it to the shader here. Now you might get some UV problems here, but not to worry at the moment. I want to take a checker and connect that to the layered texture, input 0, and we can take a ramp and hook it in to input 1. So now if we click on the layered texture, we can change the blend mode. You've got all kinds of different things: overs, ins, out, add, subtract, and whatnot. So you can see that that layered texture then in add mode, for example, here has the combination of the two. So we need to associate each part of the texture, the ramp and the checker, with a UV map. So under Window Relationship Editors, we can go to UV linking and have that as texture-centric or UV-centric. With the geometry selected, then you just make a relationship. We can take the checker to map 1 and the out color to the auto map. Now we seem to have a little bit of a problem here. So if I right mouse button and change my UV set to map 1, we may find that there is actually something wrong with the UVs. So we can take those faces and try a unitize on those to sort that out. Okay, so doesn't like the unitize. Well, we can change this a different way and just do a texture planar map there. So you can see how that is overlapping with the ramp, and we've got the two textures with different texture space on them now. Now this planar projection might not actually be very realistic, so why don't we rotate that 90 in Y and get that lined up on the front. And we could always go back to the relationship editor and change the relationships here, so we get the checker on the auto map, so it might be easier to see, and the ramp on the projection, so you can see a little bit of a different application there. So hopefully that makes this one clear. Now what we'll do next is look at another version for setting up the mapping on this head. Now an alternate method of mapping this head is to use a combination of a couple new tools. One is called Average Vertices, and the other one is called Map UV Borders. And this also lets us look at actually copying or transferring UVs from one object to another. So you can remember that the coordinates on the skull weren't very well set up initially because of the way it was modeled. So what I'm going to do is just create a duplicate of it. And let's move that up in space here. And I'm going to take those two and once again hide unselected objects. So let's just focus on those so we can see both of them. Now with this top piece, I'm going to go to the Polygons Average Vertices tool. And this is similar to the Relax UV tool, except that instead of UVs, it's working on the vertices themselves. It takes a number of iterations, and it just averages the shape down. So as I press this, we can start turning that skull into more of a spherical shape. So one might be enough. Actually, two is not bad because it rounds things out and we don't have that overlap on the eyes where they're indenting over each other. So it gets not too bad through there. So let's close this. Go back into object mode. What I want to do is first set up some basic mapping on here. So we'll go to texturing and do a spherical map. And I'm just going to rotate this around, I think it should be 90, so that we're looking straight through the front. Actually, maybe minus 90 would make more sense here. So there we have the projection. You can see how it's sort of lining up on the front, so we'll have the seam more towards the back here. And I want to take this now and cut the edges down this side, and then we'll sort of flatten it out. So what we can do is actually, there's a new tool, or a mel command. It's not a full-blown tool yet. Let me just shrink this down a little bit and get the word pad open here so that you can see what I'm typing. Okay, so the command is poly select constraint minus pp4. And if we copy paste that into Maya, into the script editor, what you can see happening here, hopefully it may not be quite clear, but by having that one edge selected, it actually propagates that selection through from sort of the pole down to the end here. And I can take that now and actually cut those UVs. So I'll just do cut UVs. And this is a good point to change our polygon display here so that on all objects I've got thicker texture borders. So I'll apply that and close so you can see that we've got the nice thick edge through there. And I'm just going to select edges through here and just take the bottom half of the map apart. And we'll take it just across these edges here. So this basically bottom section will be separated. So cut those UVs, and there you go. So we've got this one section on the bottom here. If I select a face, we can or actually select a UV would be better, and select the shell. We can take that and move it down out of the way. Now this other section down here at the bottom I'm not going to worry about, we'll just focus on the top portion of the skull. And so doing that, now we can take this and use the Map UV Border tool to start laying this out. So I'm going to select the UVs, and under Texture, once again, is Map UV Border. Put that up where we can see it. And basically we've got options on changing the border shape of this piece of geometry. It works based on a circle or a square. In this case we'll use a circle. And it basically tries to take that border and fit it. So just select the shell and apply that. So you can see what it does there. It takes that border and pulls it all in. What we have to do with this now is to get in and relax the UVs once again. Very useful tool. Okay, so we can apply that a few times till we get it looking decent. Take that and rotate it around so I can tell my top from the bottom. Let's just bring that up. Now if I select these UVs through here, I can actually get a little bit bigger selection and start to lay this space out a little bit more. So scale that up, and in something like that we may take these couple UVs here, make sure I get that one, scale them out and bring them down as well. So just a little bit of a variation as to what we did before with the other tools. Take that, maybe scale the face section up a little bit more. And at some point or other we'll be happy with that. I'm just going to move this shell down out of the way a little further. So I can select these UVs through this section and actually relax the rest of the map. So again, go back to the Relax UVs tool, and we're going to pin the selected UVs as well as the UV border and apply that, so that stretches it out a little bit more. And then we should be able to stretch this further, and we may be able to relax again and sort of start maximizing that space further. But this is a general idea with this. We could take these couple UVs here and just bring them up further. So that's the idea, and it gives you another way to lay out UVs. Now the next thing I want to do is just make sure that I've got all of these UVs fitting into the 0 to 1 space. So I'm going to select that shell, move it up here, and just scale it down a little bit. And let's select this shell first. Just going to scale this down. A little bit of weirdness on the manipulator here. There we go. Move that over into this side. And these ones will move over into the opposite side. And just get that fitting in there like so. You notice there's no UV border on this section because it's all mapped as one complete piece here. So, having done that, the next thing I can do is actually transfer the UVs from this shape down to this shape. So under polygons there's a transfer tool, and what this allows you to do is transfer different objects together. So I'm going to just close the hypershade because I want to point out that if you're forgetting how a tool works or whatever, if you look to the bottom left panel here, it'll tell you how to work the tool. So for transfer, we select two objects to be crossed, and we just pop open the options here. What do we want to transfer? Vertices, UV sets, or vertex color? So just the UV sets is fine. So selecting both of those and press transfer. So you see that this piece of the skull now has this nice mapping that we set up before. So, if you've got similar characters, very easy to sort of transfer UVs from one to the other, and once again, streamline your workflow. So having done this, we can delete this head and just focus on this one. And this sets us up to get into 3D texture painting with Artisan. For texture painting with Artisan, the first thing you need to do is assign a shader. So once again, to the hypershade. And I'll just take a Lambert here, and we need a file texture on that. So I'll connect that to color. And we can take that and assign it to the skull here. And next is switching to rendering, lighting, shading, paint textures tool. So we pop this open, and once again, it's the Artisan interface. And through here, basic things again, the radius, the shape, color you're painting with, stamp properties, basically the spacing and depth on it, and the attributes that you're going to be painting. So we start with painting color, and what we're going to do is first assign a texture, so you select your resolution. I'm going to do 512 just because it's a little bit clearer to see, and you assign textures. Now when you're doing this, you have to have a textures directory in your project directory. That's where these textures will be written to. And it can be good to save the textures as well as just saving the scene so that everything is mapping properly. So I'm just going to save that and go back in here now. And I can start by just selecting a sort of base color for the skull. I might pick something kind of grungy. Hard to get the exact color I'm looking for, but something like that should be acceptable. And I can flood fill that. So that color is not exactly what we should have there. I'm slightly colorblind. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So that might be better. Let's flood fill it again. So something like that. Now you can see there's our brush. So again, the B key will lower the radius, and we can just get in here and start painting some different colors on there. So what we might do is actually come back here and just sort of take that base color and tone it down. And actually, let's make this a little bit bigger and start to add some shadows through the eyes here, and maybe bring that down in there. Now you see that sort of weirdness that I'm getting there? I'm just going to backspace to get rid of that command. That's through the miscellaneous tab. You can paint either projectively or based on the UV textures. So if you have the UV texture mode, it'll help you get around problems like that in most cases. You might have to change your view a little bit. Okay, so you can see how that's better now. Okay, and with this I'm just going to go back to projective paint. I might lower the stamp spacing a bit so it's not quite as jittery on the textures there. It might be hard to see what's happening on the video, but you can take my word for it. So you might do something like that and color the eye in. I can go and change the color back and just erase that later. I'm not too concerned about it. So what I might do is take a red color and maybe paint some blood onto here. So let's lower the brush size, and I can't get any smaller because of my lower radius, so let's make this smaller. And there we go, so I can take that down and just start painting some blood in here. And you can see there again I had that problem where I backspaced over, or sorry, my space overflowed the lines, and that's based on the UV mapping again. So a bit of blood there, or maybe a bleeding nose. Go back to a black color and get some nice eye accentuation through here. Now this is a little bit sluggish now, and that's because I probably set the stamp spacing a little too low, so let's take that a bit higher and get that up a bit. So there, that's better performance through there. So and what you can do is adjust your blend mode so that you can actually lighten, darken, multiply, screen or overlay or whatnot. So I could get in here and sort of try and smooth that out a little bit. Okay, so that's the idea with the Artisan Texture Paint tool. Now the final texturing related thing I'd like to show is the level of detail tool. Now this isn't necessarily texturing, but it's related because I'm going to texture a low version of this piece of geometry. So what I want to do is look at it, and if I press 7 I can get into lighting mode. So I'm just going to create a light here. We can create a point light, and let's move that up and get it out here in front. Maybe if we bring it down we get that sort of spooky look. Okay, so I'm just going to set that up like this to render. Now what I want to do is turn on my view camera settings and open the resolution gate so I can see what resolution I'm rendering at, and go into the render into new window just so we can get an idea of what that's looking like. And I'm going to open up the render globals and select a resolution to render at. So I'm going to set a custom resolution here, and I'll just make it 256 by 256, higher than I would want for my low res version of the model, but it'll make it easier for you to see what I'm doing. So having set that there, then I can bring this up and scale it in to fit that resolution gate. Okay, so that should fit my texture pretty square. And we can redo that render one more time. Now if we get in here close, you can see a sort of chunkiness. I want to show the alpha channel, and you can see there, I hope, that there's some sort of smoothing through there with the alpha channel. What we need to do is adjust this so that we have a nice sharp edge there, so that we don't get feathering with the alpha channel. So under the render options, scroll down a bit here, is the composite flag, and we can set a threshold for that. So we want that to be a value of 1 so that we have nice hard edges here. So if I re-render this and we come in close and go into alpha mode, you can see now I have no feathering through there, so that this makes a good texture to apply as sort of a single plane for the low res version of this model. So I just need to save this, and I can do that here, File, Save Image, and I'm going to save it into my Images directory. So I'll call it the low skull.iff, only 2 F's. Save that. Close the render view, and I'm going to create a polyplane. Close the render globals as well, and I just need this 1 division by 1 division and rotate it 90 degrees in Z. So I can bring that down and into place here with my skull. Depends where on the model I have it as to where I want that switching point, but we'll call it something like that. And go back to Hypershade. I'm going to create a new Lambert shader with a file texture mapped on color. And then we just look for that image map that we saved. Low skull. And then I can map that to the plane. So in texture mode, we can see that on there. Now what I have happening is that that's actually rotated strangely on me. So I'm going to rotate the shader around 90. And let's just hide that. Okay, so we've got the low res version there. I can bring that piece back. And you could get in here and adjust the way that map sort of matches in space as much as you want. Now with that plane, I'm going to call it low, and with the skull, call it high. Shift select the two of them, and under edit, we've got level of detail, and I'm going to select group. Okay, so you can see there that it flipped from one to the other. And as I dolly with the camera here, we get this switching between the two. Now, that place where the switch happens is not really where I'd like it to happen. So I'm going to take this back further and just adjust the threshold value between these till I get them switching at the proper place. Okay, so just adjust that like so. And now you can see we've got the two switching. Okay, and this would be much more effective if I put more work into creating a nice texture, but what I really wanted to show with rendering that image out was the composite threshold value so that you get hard edges as opposed to feathering with that. The last thing I'm going to show regarding the texturing workflow is some pre-lighting and color per vertex. So here I have a light and just one of the pillars that I used on the to hold up the track in the level scene. And if you press the 7 key, you can get into lighting mode. So I can just rotate this so that you can see that the lighting is changing as I move that. Okay, so with that selected now, I can, so with the geometry selected, I can go to Edit Polygons, Colors, Pre-Light, and you know, this may, let's just double check this. I'm going to increase the intensity to 2 just to make this more obvious. I think it'll read better on the video monitor for you. So increase the intensity on 2 just so it's brighter. I opened the polygon pre-light options, and you know, you've got different settings here based on what you want to control or how you want to control things. But basically with this, we can just select that and press pre-light. So you can see that that adjusted it, so we have darkness up on the top and brightness over on this side, and it's light up there as well. So we've got the shadow coming from the overhang as we would expect. Now we can take this a step further and actually get in there and paint color per vertex values. So under Edit Polygons, Colors, there is Paint Vertex Color Tool. There's also Apply Color, which is basically selecting and just applying a color through here. The Paint Vertex Color Tool works a little bit better, or more dynamically, in that you can paint right onto the geometry. So let's select a color value here. We might get something bright, and I can take my brush size up and just start painting on some vertices to get maybe some sort of radioactive glow off of the water in the bottom of the scene, and that helps me get color around the backside as well, and gives that glow effect through there. So the color per vertex and pre-lighting are both fairly easy to create and apply. Now what we could do with this, if you want a map for this, is with your Artisan tool open, go to Map, and you can import or export attribute maps. So we can give it a name here, and I'll call it CPV map, and it's going to export at the size I have here, 256, and image format will be the IFF by default. Or you can change it to any of these various settings, GIFs, JPEGs, TIFF, PICs, and whatnot. So that should have saved it, and it actually tells me it's saved into my working directory. So if I explore my computer here, I can get into GDC directory and open that with fcheck. Okay, so there is my color per vertex map. This actually isn't as good as you would expect it, and that's because my map is created based on the UVs I have for the geometry, and the UVs in this pillar were just normalized so that they're all squares. So I should be able to just select this, apply some mapping quickly to it, and let's try and export that map once again. So resave that. Don't need that up any longer. So now you can see the way that light was calculated. So the top section's black because I just did a quick cylindrical projection there and didn't get much happening, but here's the shadow underneath the top of the pillar, the glowing at the bottom, and the color sort of up the sides on the one side. So hope that makes sense and is useful for you. In this section of the tape, we'll be looking at character setup and animation. More specifically, building skeletons, attaching the geometry to the skeletons, creating custom controls with IK and constraints, and finally looking at tracks, the nonlinear animation editor for Maya. We will now look at the character setup of the bike and the rider from the GDC presentation that I recently did. Again, this was done in version 2.5, and the tools we're showing are updated for version 3. So this is a rider that we're looking at, and basically he's set up with smooth skin, and he's got IK and constraints to control what's happening. So for example, I can animate this or move the sword, and that controls the movement of the arm and the wrist from there. And we've got some control on the feet, if I can select that. I added a custom attribute here to control the roll of the foot, and you see how that affects through the leg and up into the body. Oops, look at that from another view here. And we've got some influence objects up here in the shoulder to control that movement. If I bring that up, you can see how that sort of affects what's going on in the shoulder there. And that's sort of the basic overview there. We've got a selection handle back at the back here just to control the character in general. So that's a basic overview. What we'll do is now get into building the skeleton for him. Now for building the skeleton for this character, we're really only interested in the geometry of the character. The helmet and the swords we can ignore for now. So I'll turn those off with the view isolate selected, and just shift into a side view here. Actually, I should perhaps do display hide unselected objects so that they're not showing up in the other windows as well. and make sure we're looking at polygons in this window. So what I'm going to do is just start in this with this side view of the biker and open up the joint tool. Now what we're going to do is use the default settings. Basically we want to have the auto joint orient set to X, Y, Z, and what that'll do is control the axes that the joints rotate around. You can set these to any one of the following options here. I recommend setting them to something though. Degrees of freedom means what angles or axes the joints can rotate in, and we'll leave all of those open. The other things, auto joint limits, we're not really concerned about because we'll let the IK control where things move and stop moving. We'll create the IK later, and scale compensate we can leave on. This is basically control for scaling joints later on so that the hierarchy scales properly. So in the side view, I'm just going to place a joint and get the knee down here. If I don't like where I've placed it, I can use the middle mouse button to reposition it. I'm going to place a joint into the ankle region and one down at the heel. And then using the shift key, drag it out, and you see that constrains it horizontally. Whichever direction you click in first is the direction it will get constrained in. And constrain one more to here. So that's the leg, and I'll just quickly rename these. So we've got hip. Pressing the arrow down key will walk down through the hierarchy. So there's the knee, there's the ankle, heel, ball, and toe. Okay. You may not really want to name the joints, but when it comes to the smooth skinning, it's something that's very useful to have, so you should do it at some place or other. So just have to turn this isolate select off because that wasn't really helpful in this case. We can actually look at this in the front view for the time being. And I'm just going to bring that bone chain here through the center of the leg. And I'm going to duplicate it with the default options. So just duplicate, and I want that on the opposite side, so I just have to set my translate Z value, in this case to a positive value, which will put it there, and that will make the character symmetrical. So the next thing we need to do is create the back through here. So we can go back to the side view of the character here. And I'm just going to place a joint here and here. I'm not placing too many. One there, and then one up into the top of the head. And we can do the same thing here for the shoulder. So I'll put one in the shoulder, down into the elbow, into the wrist. And I don't have too much action going on in the hand, so I'm just going to put one in the wrist, bring this bone down, and have that one bone for the fingers. Using the arrow keys, again, I can walk up and I'll just put one joint over for the thumb. So there's those pieces. And again, just renaming a few of these. So shoulder, elbow, and wrist. So we can take that and move it over here and actually rotate that around so that it fits into the arm. And what I actually recommend doing is getting this fairly close up to the top so that the deformation works better through here. So I'm going to bring that over and rotate it a little bit more. And I can just scale this out so that the joints are in the appropriate positions. Okay, so that's pretty good there. I might actually take this joint here and just use the insert key to change the pivot point of it and move it down into the fingers more, and the same thing with this one, so it's towards the end of the thumb. And that can actually come back, try and get that lined up a little more closely there. So that looks pretty good, like that. You may want to actually get into shading, shade options, X-ray, so you can see how the joint lines up inside the geometry a little more easily. So that's the idea there. just going to press Insert key to get out of that display mode. And what I want is one more joint right at the center here. That's so that the spine does, the rotation at the root of the spine doesn't cause the legs to rotate. So I'll just put one joint in there and call that root. So these joints can now be parented, and I'm just using the P key to parent the joints. Okay, and parent that one. Now for this area through here, I'm actually going to create a clavicle joint, which I'll put in somewhere around here. I want to get it closer to the top so it's clear later again when it comes to the skinning as to what's happening. So select the child first and then the parent, and the P key will parent it, and that's it. So here's the skeleton for the character. The only thing we need now is to get the opposite side. So with this joint selected, under skeleton I can mirror joint, and I like to mirror behavior, and in this case we're going across the XY axis. Mirroring the orientation will cause the joints to try and line up in the same manner. I prefer the behavior because I can take that, and as I rotate one in, I can have both selected rotate in one axis and get them to do the same kind of motion, like this. And that makes it easier for doing things like skinning and other setup things you might want to do. Now, one other thing I should point out while we're just looking at the character, the elbow and the knees I built with a bend in them as opposed to straight. If you build those straight, you're going to have trouble when you add the IK chain. And I'll just give you a little example of that here. So if I grid snap these joints here and just add an IK chain through here, I take that chain and move it, the handle is moving, but I can't actually bend at the elbow there, and that's based on the preferred angle of the joint. So what you should do is delete the IK handle, select the joint and rotate it, use your right mouse button and set the preferred angle. Then you can add the IK chain again, and now if you move it, you get the bending as you would expect it. So just something to keep in mind. If you can set up that bend beforehand, it'll save yourself some work down the road. So I'm just going to delete that and come back into here. And so that basically concludes setting up the skeleton here for the character. To skin the character, I use the smooth skinning. If you go to the skin menu, you can see bind skin. You've got two options, smooth bind or rigid bind. Basically, the differences are smooth bind will take every vertex or CV, whatever it is, on the surface, and it can be weighted sort of based on a number of different joints. With the rigid bind, each vertex can only be associated with one joint. So for this reason, the smooth bind does give some nicer deformations and can be easier to set up. It's the newer method for binding skin to a skeleton in Maya, and that's what we'll be using with this character. So we can go smooth bind options, and what you want to do is select the geometry and the root joint of the skeleton. So we're going to bind to the complete skeleton. The bind method is the closest joint, as the defaults are. Max influences, I tend to set a little lower initially, so I can set that down to 3, and then the drop-off rate is 5. That's, sort of the influence each joint will have on the skin. Max influences, each joint is basically an influence, so how many joints can affect each vertex with the initial binding. So having set that, we'll just do a bind skin. And let's turn this X-ray mode off. if I select a joint here, I can rotate that, and we're getting pretty good deformation already. It looks like there's a little bit of binding maybe onto the hand and sort of in through the pelvis there. But if we come down through to the knee, you can see that's pretty good. We're losing a little bit of volume there, but that can be fixed up without too much trouble. And again, down at the ankle, it's pretty nice deformation through there. And that's all with the default settings. Where we're going to have more trouble will actually be through the shoulders. So I can grab both of those joints and rotate them up, and you see what's happening is that because of the proximity of the joints in the arms to the body, they've actually taken some of those weights. So we need to change this so that the sides of the character actually stick to the skeleton. So 2 ways to edit the skinning. First one is to select the geometry and go to Skin, Edit Smooth Skin, Paint Skin Weights tool. And this is the artisan interface that you get to work with. And basically what you do is select a joint that you want to adjust the weighting on. So they're listed here in the window, and as you select them, it will show you weight values. Black is a value of 0, and white is a value of 1, so anywhere in between means it's, a value of 0 to 1, or something like that. So what I should do is start off at the first joint in the skeleton, right here, and just start replacing that value. I recommend replacing as opposed to removing values, and sort of starting at the root of the skeleton and working downwards towards the end points. It just tends to give better results. So I'll just paint that white there, and I can start taking this around the sides here. Come around the back. Okay, and you can see how that pops down. Now you may see that some of these vertices pop down in a number of steps. That's because it's trying to normalize the values on the weight. So as you paint one vertex, it will change the values on the other influences on that same vertex. So you may see a little bit of popping that way. I'm just going to change this layout so that we can see this more clearly here. Just so that we're not losing screen space behind the artisan window here, and we can watch more clearly what's happening. So I've painted that first joint. Let's move up in the skeleton and paint a little bit more. What you may want to do from time to time is just toggle into wireframe mode so you can see the extents of the joint. So it's coming down to about here. So I can actually paint those vertices white as well. It should give me an okay effect. So just paint that around, come around the back, and just get that onto the spine. What I'm going to do is copy the weighting from this side to the other side later on, so I'm not too concerned about the right-hand side of the body. Now I can find the hip joint and start adjusting the weights over here as well on this side. Okay, and let's go back into wireframe mode. So again, I can go back to that first joint and just adjust the weighting here. That might actually be better on the second joint. So just paint that in like so. Maybe go back to the first joint and adjust the weighting through here. So just to give it a little bit of weight to itself. And what you can do at some point is go into smooth operation and just sort of weight that a little nicer through there so that it falls off a bit more between the joints. Now you're going to get into situations like this where it can be hard to actually manipulate the joint painting or the influence painting with paint effects. And another way to deal with this is to select the vertices and open up Window, General Editors, Component Editor. And I'll just spread this out a bit. Basically, this window lets you control many things on vertices. So for example, we've got the vertex position and coloring and the normal values. We've got cluster values, springs, particles, and whatnot. In this case, we're using smooth skin, so it's called the skin cluster that we're looking for. And this will list all the influence objects that are affecting this skin, and we can come through here and find what we're looking for. So the value on this shoulder I want to be higher. Well, higher is actually the wrong way to go in this case, so I'm going to lower that down to 0.5, and you can see how that's changing the value through there. So these couple vertices should actually probably be on this joint here with most of their weighting, so I'm going to increase the value here to about 0.5, and you can see them popping into place. Might actually be better on joint 2. So you can sort of change the values that way. You've also got a slider down at the bottom of the window, so you can take those values up and down, and you see as I move those, the vertices will slide back and forth among the options. So we could grab a couple vertices up here, and these ones should actually perhaps be affected more by the clavicle. So if I select it, I can change the weighting on the entire row, or again use the slider to adjust those. Okay, so it's not too bad, and we'll fix up this shoulder a little bit more with another one of the tools. So it may be hard to see what I'm doing, but I'm just grabbing a couple more points in here and trying to adjust those appropriately. And you may need to go into shaded mode to see more clearly what's happening. So increase those values, and that looks to be about the last one that I have to worry about. Okay, so I've sort of moved them roughly into place, and what I'll do is just finish this up and smooth it out a little bit more with the artisan painting again. So with this one, just go into smooth mode, smooth that out a bit through here. And I can replace the values here to 1 through this region, perhaps. And let's just find that top shoulder. You can see I'm maybe mangling this too much here, so let's go back to the clavicle and repaint that in there white to fill that in. Anyways, that's more or less the idea there. Could use a little bit more on the shoulder here, so let's just go back there and smooth those out. Okay, so that's pretty good on the shoulder there. A little bit weird, but again, we'll fix that a little more afterwards. So that's the general idea of dealing with that. So I can close the artisan tool and go full screen here. Let's go back to object mode. And with the skeleton selected, any joint in it, there's something called a bind pose. So under skin, you can go to bind pose, and that will pop the skeleton back to the position that it was in when you bound the skin to it. So having done this, I'm now ready to actually mirror the geometry, or mirror the skinning. So under skin, edit smooth skin, we're going to mirror skin weights. We just select the axis. In this case, it's XY, and we want to go from positive Z to negative Z. Just check the icon down here if you're confused. So we mirror that. It just takes a minute to calculate. And we can select both of these joints now and rotate them. And you can see that that is pretty much the same on either arm. So it saves a lot of work. Now with that, a related note, there's also the copy skin weights, and this will allow you to either take geometry across different surfaces or from one character to another. So if you're working on a video game with a lot of different characters, typically like a sports game with these next generation consoles, you'll have a lot more characters and variation in body types. You have a referee and large defensive players, smaller offensive players and whatnot. So you could set up one character and then basically copy the weights from one character to another and sort of really improve your speed and workflow for getting things done with things. So let me just rotate this back to 0. Oops, 0 wasn't the bind pose. So I'm just going to go to bind pose. And the other thing I want to show with this is the influence objects. So remember the shoulder is sort of losing shape a little bit through here. So I can fix this by creating an influence object. It's just in this, get a view here. I'm just going to do this with a curve. So I'm going to place a CV curve fairly close to the geometry. And I can take that and move it forward so it's, you know, directly over the shoulder. And while I'm at it, I may as well take the pivot point and snap it to the end of the curve. Okay, so let's get in here close. So under skinning, again, edit smooth skin is add influence. And basically select the surface first and then the influence transform. So pick the surface and then this curve, skin, edit smooth skin, add influence. And we're going to say use geometry, drop off 5 should be pretty good. If it's not, we can adjust it. And based on if you're using polygons or NURBS, you've got sort of sampling values on them. So let's add this and test it out, see how it looks. So I rotate the arm up, and then I can take this influence object and I can actually rotate that as well. And I can also do a combination of scaling on it or even transforming. You can see I've got a little bit of movement in the cheek here, so I could have done that with slightly more drop-off. But this is basically what I'm looking for, some sort of correction to fix what's happening in the shoulder there. So let's undo this back to the point just after I added the influence object. The thing with this is that this is a couple steps. I have to rotate the shoulder and then I have to adjust the influence object here, this curve. And now I can automate this process using set-driven key. Set-driven key is basically an easy way to create relationships between different objects, and it provides a curve to define the relationship between them so that it's sort of easily visual and visible and also editable. So under animate is set-driven key, and we'll just go to set options. The way this works is you need a driver and a driven object. So the driver in this case will be this clavicle joint, so we'll say load driver. And in this case, it's going to be the Y rotate. Okay, I'm just looking, RGB relates to X, Y, and Z, so that's the Y rotate, so I'll just click on there. And then with the curve, I'll have this working on the, well, first load that as the driven. and I'll have that work on the rotate X, and I may as well scale it as well, so I can scale that in Z. So Control select that. And basically what I'm going to do is press the key button here. Then I select the shoulder and rotate it up into position. I've got a little bit of weighting issues here on the chest that could be smoothed out a little further. I'm not going to worry about that right now. So I've got that up into position and select the curve. I can either select the curve here or I can select it through the window. Same thing for the driver, so you can switch back and forth through the window as opposed to having to pick through the UI, which might be difficult with different setups. So I'll just take that, rotate it up, and scale that in a little bit. Looks like it could use a little more rotation through there. And just key it again. So now I can go back to selecting the shoulder, and you see as I rotate that now, that controls the deformation of the shoulder much more appropriately. It gives a nice look without collapsing on itself. Now the set-driven key, we can get in here and look at that in the graph editor. So Window Animation Editor's graph editor. And you want to select the driven object to see what's happening with it. So I just press the A key to frame all. And basically it's showing me the rotate X and scale Z. And it shows me driven in the top left and the shoulder rotate Y in this case. That's sort of what's controlling these two curves, so that's the driver attribute, if you will. And then these curves, I can actually get in and move them around to adjust the amount of deformation that we're getting at different points. And I can even select these keys and adjust the tangency so we have an ease in, ease out type of thing, or even take this so far as to add a key to the curve to have different interpolation through different parts of the transformation or interpolation on there. So let me undo that and get that out of the way. So that's the general information that I wanted to show you with skinning. So the influence objects, the smooth skin, and painting skin weights, and remember using the set-driven key. It's useful for a lot of different places other than just the smooth skinning example here, and I'll point that out in a couple places where I've used it elsewhere. With the skinning set up on the character, we can now start to look at some of the controls, such as IK and constraints. First thing I'd like to point out, though, is this selection handle. And basically, you can have selection handles on any piece of geometry. So we could add it to, say, one of these swords, for example. So I'll just pick the top node of it. And you can either go to Display, Component Display, and turn on Selection Handles, and have it right there. Or you can do it through the Attribute Editor with Display and Display Handle. Now, with that display handle, you have the selection handle attributes, which control the positioning of it. So in this case, I'm just going to push that backwards a bit so that it's easy to, or push it outwards so that it's easy to select that. So now when I pick that, it automatically picks the geometry. And the nice thing about the selection handles is that they're the first thing in the selection priority list. So if you right mouse button on any of these things, it'll tell you what's there, and you can see selection handles have the first priority. So that means as I drag across the scene, first thing that's going to get selected are these selection handles as opposed to the joints or the geometry or other things in the scene. So they're good to work with and can speed up your workflow. Now what we really want to get into is adding some IK to this character. And what we'll look at is the IK two-bone solver. The interesting thing about this is that it's a scaled-down version of the rotate plane solver that you may be familiar with in Maya. And the source code for this IK solver ships with Maya so that you can have this IK solution available for use in your game or interactive application. So what you need to do is add the plugin, and that's under Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. And closer to the top is ik2bsolver.mll. If you're working on IRIX, it'll be .so. I've already got it loaded in my scene, but for you, it's just a matter of turning it on or off. I'm actually getting a warning here that I've got it in use, so I'm going to cancel that so that I don't unload it. But other plugins you can load and unload in a similar manner. This one I'm getting the warning because I have a node in my scene and it doesn't want to get rid of the plugin and sort of cause problems for me. So we'll close that, and what you need to do is create the IK2 solver into your scene, and the syntax for this is create node IK2 capital B solver, and you can press return. I'll just copy this and put it into a WordPad just so you can see that for a moment. Okay, so there's the syntax, and always good to use a semicolon after there. So that'll create the new node for you, the two-bone solver node in the scene, and then you can access that through the IK handle tool. So let's close out, don't need to save it. Go back into Maya here. And under skeleton is the IK handle tool. We're going to set the current solver to IK2B solver and close. And what I want to do is just select on, say, a shoulder joint and go down to the wrist joint of the character. So I can come back into shaded mode here, or textured mode if we like, and then move that. Okay, so it's as simple as that to get that in there and working on the character. Now the next thing we actually want to do is take this and make the sword control the hand. The reason I want to do this is for when the character is on the bike, I want the swords to react to the bike, and I want the rider to react to the swords, which are, you know, his means for steering it. So I have to sort of set up the flow of command, if you will. So the sword will control what's happening in the hand here. Now what I'm going to do is create a locator, and I'm just going to move that and use the V key to snap it to this joint here. So what I can do is take this IK handle, point constrain it to the locator here, and that locator I can call the left hand. So under constrain menu is point, and what you do is select the target and then the object to constrain. So the target is the locator, the object to constrain is the IK handle, constrain point. So now as I select that locator, I have locators turned off, so I'll just turn that on. Now you can see I have the same motion through there on the hand. So let's undo that. Now what I'm going to do is take this and actually parent it into the sword. So use the P key to do that. And now I can use my selection handle on the sword to do that. And you see what happens as I move that, the hand is actually sort of rotating around there in a manner that's not exactly correct. So I'll undo that, and what I need to do is actually set up an orient constraint in this relationship as well. So as we had before, with the orient constraint, you select the target followed by the object to constrain. So again, the locator, and shift select the joint at the hand here, and do orient. And what we see is that this hand freaks out, and that's because the local axes of the geometry weren't lined up. If you want to adjust this, you can go into component mode, and under the question mark here is the local rotation axes, so you can select them like so for this thumb joint, for example, and then rotate it around to fix that. In this case, I'm not that concerned about it because I can work on this in object mode and just take that constraint itself and rotate it so that the hand is in the proper position. Okay, so that's pretty good. And now when I select that and move it, you see that the hand stays oriented properly, so it looks like the hand is always staying on the handle of the sword. So that's the basic setup on the rider. What we can do from here is to move on to the bike and look at how that's set up. So just open a new scene here, which I should have set up and ready to go. Okay, so here's the bike, and I've got a small animation on it, so it actually transforms from, a rideable object into, a character that can go out and kill, so we can have sort of a fighting racing game, have a little bit of fun with that. So we've got a couple different things going on here. That animation is accomplished with some custom attributes to help with the controls. So if I select this node, this is the root of the skeleton, and you may not be able to see, but I've got some extra settings in here. For example, transform, which as I move that controls the position of the hands and the head. So let's undo that. The back upright is just changing the rotation of the back itself. The jets, so their position changes through there. And then the steering itself, so come back here, we can see that a little more clearly. So I can actually control everything like this. So I've just got a few of my own attributes that control what's happening here. So if we wanted to set up another attribute for maybe controlling the head in another manner, I can just come in here and go Modify, Add Attribute, and let's call it Head Twist. And what you can do is set up data types for these attributes: vector, float, integer, boolean, and you can set up minimum and maximum values. In this case, I'm not too worried about it, so I'm just going to press OK. So that gives me the new attribute down here, and it's got a different color in the field. That's because these ones are animated and it's not. But what I'm going to do is connect that directly to the rotation of the head, actually to the, let's see if I can find the appropriate joint here. Yeah, to the skull rotate joint. So with Window General Editors, I'm going to open the Connection Editor, and I'm going to connect the pelvis to the skull rotate. So with the pelvis selected, I reload left, and let's get that skull joint in here and reload right. So scrolling down on the left side, I can get my new head twist attribute and highlight it, and then I can find the rotate of the head joint here, and I'll just turn on the manipulator so I can see which one it is. And I think this would be good to rotate in X. So I just make a connection like that, and the two attributes are colored, showing that there is a relationship between them. And now I can go to my head twist attribute here and slide that back and forth and manipulate that control in this manner. Okay, and that's basically what was done with the other attributes that I showed you there. The slight difference is that a couple of them actually use a set-driven key. So the custom attribute would be the set-driven key driver, and then set up the relationship curve to the driven objects in the scene. A couple other points to make note of in here is that we've got the joints shown. It's just a little hard to pick them out, but here's one through the leg. All this geometry on the bike itself is rigid, meaning I don't want it to deform. So instead of using the smooth skinning, I just select the piece of geometry and parent it to the appropriate joint so that it moves with it. Okay, so one other thing that's happening here is as I scrub through the animation here, you can see I've got a locator here, or sorry, over here and over here. And I've got a couple locators out here in the front. And what I've actually done is animated the constraint weight so that through this section right here, the value changes from 1 on these handles to 1 on these handles. If I select an IK handle, you can see the constraints, and you can see that the channels are animated through there, and that's just done with the set-driven key. So that's the basic overview of how this skeleton was animated and set up for this short sequence here. Now this part of the tape was not actually part of the GDC presentation, as tracks is one of those new features in version 3. So we've got to switch to a new character. This is basically a tackling dummy kind of guy, and he's got a little bit of motion capture on him for a walk. So he takes a few steps, and then the motion cycles through and he bounces back to the beginning. So what we want to do is get this into the tracks editor and start to work with it and manipulate it a little bit. The first thing you need to do is to actually create a character node. So if you select the root node of your character, you can find the appropriate attributes, so in this case the translate and rotate, and I will create. So I'll call the character football, and I'll say all keyable except for no translate and no rotate, meaning that the translate and rotate attributes will be added to the character. So I'll create the character. That adds an input here of football, and we've got the translate X and through to the rotate Z attributes of the character. What we need are these other joints through the skeleton to be in there as well. So I'm going to open up the outliner and shift-click on that node to expand. And I need, basically, I want everything selected, all the joints, that is. So Control select those, and these ones I just need the rotate attributes. So I'm going to go character and add to character. So that looks at what's selected in the channel box and will add based on that. So I can close the attribute editor now, and you can see that I've got a bunch of extra attributes here in the football character. And that becomes the current character down at the bottom here. You can change between different characters by pressing the down arrow, and you can also open up the character sets window. So if we expand this here, I can pop that open and you can see all the associated channels, and you can add and remove by clicking here and clicking there to make the association, just like with the connection editor. So the animation at the time being here remains unchanged. I can go back into texture mode. And what I want to do now is to open the tracks editor, and we'll just put it up here. So here's my character, and right now we have an empty track. What I need to do is create a clip for him. So under create is clip, and you can do this in different ways. I'll just call it walk, and we'll use the animation curve range here. So create the clip, and what it does is puts that clip right into the tracks editor for us. It's also put into the visor, and we'll look at that a little bit later. So here's the clip, and right off the bat I can change the timing of it by clicking on the top right of the clip. Let's undo that, and I can also change the cycling on it by using the bottom right. So it might be a little bit hard to see here, but I have hash marks here that show where the clip is cycling. Now when I play this back, it's not going to mean a lot because of the weird animation that's already on him. So if I double click on there, I can reset these things. So I'm just setting the cycle back to 1, and the scale is left at 1. Now what I want to do is change this animation so that it will cycle properly and offset in time. So I'm going to look at the animation, and at the first frame, he's got his right foot down, and the left toe is just leaving the ground. So I want to come through the cycle to that position again. So right about there, which in this case is frame 40. So at this point I can split the clip, so that breaks it in two, and this piece I can delete, or I could use the right mouse button and disable it or something like that. So now as I play this back, I've got a shorter animation with nothing happening. So if I stop this, I can get the clip here and start to cycle it. So what you see is he's still popping back in space to the start position, and that's based on the offset on the clip. By default, it's absolute. What we want this to be, in this case, is relative. So I can play this now, and he continues to step through the animation and gets it in an additive manner. Now you might see a little bit of weirdness here towards the end of that, and that's basically because I was a bit sloppy when I did my split on the clip. I should have done it a little bit further apart. You can see, so through that first section it's good, and then it's a bit abrupt there. So what I may actually want to do is duplicate that instead of cycling it. So if I put my cycle back to 1, get in a little closer here, and we can copy that and then paste it, and it should be okay like that. So I'm just going to take that and move it a few frames down and select the two and create a blend between them. So there's the motion maybe a little bit better through there. Now we'll see another example of blending the animation in the next step here. So what I'm going to do is open up another file. So here's another scene with the football player again, and in this scene he's in a default position. We should already have the football character node defined, and as we slide through here we see not much happening. So what I want to do is actually create a pose from this position. So I'm going to select the character and create pose, and we'll just call this rest. Create that. And I mentioned before about the visor. You can access that through here. Up at the top you're going to have your character clips and poses. So we've got clips and poses. Here's the rest clip that I just created, so I can drag that down into the beginning of my scene here in the tracks editor. And I'm just going to bring that across to start at frame 1. And you can also import and export animation through here. So right now my unused clips and poses are empty. So what I can do is go to File, Import Clip. It's similar to the exporting clip. And let's import the skip clip. So import that, and that will show up in the visor, and then I can drag that down into tracks as I need it. So I'll put it in here, close the visor, and just change the view a bit. I'm going to take this and start it around frame 20. Now if we play this animation back, we might not get exactly what we expect. You see that he goes from the stationary rest position into skipping motion, and from there does a little bit of weirdness with the legs. So let's just change the animation range here. So what we need to do is, first set up a blend with this, or that's what one would think would be the first thing to do. So you select those two and create a blend. Now with the blend, you can set up different weighting, linear, ease in, ease out, or combo ease in, ease out. I'll just use a linear right now. It doesn't matter that much because you can select that blend and press this key to look at the animation curves, and there it is. So again, you could just select keys and adjust it if you want. Ease in, ease out, there it is. So anyways, here's the blend. Now we get a little bit of difference in the animation in that through this section there's actually motion as opposed to being static like it was before, but we've got this weird interpolation through there and it's not giving us what we'd expect. So we've got to do a little bit of tweaking on these curves to clean things up. Now what you can do to make this easier is to select these, the pose, the clip, and the blend, and merge that together. So under Edit is Merge, and we'll just name it the merged clip and add it to tracks. We don't want to bother putting into the visor right now. So we merge it, and there it is. Now we've basically got the same animation, but we can get in here and start to adjust it, again with the graph editor. So pick that, and frame everything. You can see we've got a ton of curves in there to worry about. The first thing I'm interested in is the rotate, and you can see that it goes from a very low value here at the beginning up to a high value at the end. So I just want to change that so that he's facing 180 degrees at the beginning of the curve, or at the beginning of the animation, and then get this extra animation keyframes out of there. So I'll just delete those and select those two keys and make it a spline through there. So for this first part of the animation, that fixes things up. Now we can also see that with the translate, he's actually shifting over into position at 20. So if I look at my translate curves over the range of 1 to 20, they're moving somewhat. So I can take these and just W to move them, and I'm holding the Shift key to translate in a straight manner. So something like that should get them into the proper position, and I can get rid of those keys in the middle and just smooth that out again. Now I didn't line them up quite properly, so I can take another moment here to try and straighten that out and get a little bit better animation on that. So let's just scrub through here and see what happens. So now we don't have the shifting, but we've got this crazy leg thing happening. And that's basically at the hips. So again, let's get back into the graph editor, and we're going to have this down on the left hip. If we look at those, you can see we've got this strange animation on it, and on the right hip, similar sort of thing. So why don't we fix the right hip first. I want to move this so that I can see what's happening with them. So again, I'm just going to shift it to match up with the other curve points and watch visually so that the animation appears to be lining up as I would expect it. So when I get it into this point, it's a little bit of tweaking here to get those curves in the exact position that I need them. So something like that looks pretty good. And so once again, grab these keys through here. We can just expand that out to make sure I've got just up to 20 where the real curve started there. And you can see how those have the ease in, ease out as there was on the blend curve or blend segment curves. So delete that, and once again make these spline curves so that we get a smooth blend through there, and we can just play that or scrub through there, and you see how that leg moves into the proper position. So it's a matter of doing the same thing with the left hip. Now, one thing you may want to do is actually see these attributes colored. So if you select the clip, you can activate it. And what that'll do is it shows you here colored, and it also shows you where the keys are in the timeline. So, useful thing to look at. And for what we're about to do, you have to do this. What I want to happen here is I'm going to apply the Euler filter so that these curves have better interpolation through this section. So I'm going to select just curves. I'll turn off the keys and tangents. So select those and do curves Euler filter. So you see how that sorts them out. This happens a lot with motion capture data as well as just blending animation together. So you should be prepared to do this from time to time. And basically the animation is still fine through there. There is that little bit of weirdness in the leg, but now that that's happened, we can actually see more clearly that it's coming from these two keyframes here. Just got to turn my select key back on. Select those and delete them, and that'll give me smooth interpolation through there. I could actually take that and do a spline interp through there to get that better. So, same thing as we did before. I want to select a key and move it up into the right place, as close as I can tell. Okay, so that looks decent through there. Get these curves and delete them, and one more time do the spline interpolation through there. And now we have the blending through there from the rest pose into the skipping, and then he skips through his animation and he turns to look to see that someone's about to clobber him for skipping around on the football field. Now what we can do again is start to split this up and adjust the animation on it more fully. So through those first 20 frames, he goes from his rest into preparing to skip. So I'm just going to edit and split that right there. Let me undo that and just deactivate the keys on here. Okay, so there we are at 20. Let's split that. And then we can slide through here, and if we go to somewhere around here, maybe 66 looks pretty good. So split that clip, take this, delete it, and then we can increase our cycle off the end there, and then let's just take a look here. So it goes up, goes through the skip, and comes back to where he started. So must set my offset to relative mode. Let's rewind and play one more time. Now you can see a little bit of weirdness through the shoulder and maybe in a couple other places as well, but let's get in a bit closer here so we can see that. And right around this section where it starts to cycle again, you see how the arm goes through the body. And that's based on the way the curves look. Again, it's this relative versus absolute offset. When it's in relative mode, it's adding the position of the last curve, or where the curve was, to the position of it at the start. Now if we get in and look at the right shoulder here, we can see a good example of that. So I'll select those three curves and focus on them. Now, a good trick to visualizing this is to turn on infinity, so view infinity, and select the curves and set post infinity to cycle. Now if we come down to this end of the curves, you can see through there that, you know, this is the start of the curve and there's the end of the curve, or sorry, the end of the curve and the start of the curve, and they're not matching up, so we can start to smooth that out a little bit. So I can bring that down till it matches up. That one looks like it should actually go up, and this one comes down. So really what you need is these first and last keyframes to line up properly to get the proper translation or addition, if you will, of the tracks together. So I'm just going to delete a couple curves or keys in there and give that a smooth interpolation through there. And I can turn that infinity stuff off if I need to. But you see now that that shoulder is fixed up and it's not penetrating through the body. It's a little bit hard with this motion capture data that I've got to get very smooth cycles off the bat because it is rather old and it was magnetic, so it needs a fair bit of cleanup. But that's the general idea, and you know, just as well for you to see something that's not quite as polished so that you'll know how to deal with this situation when it comes up, because chances are that it will sometime or other. So that's the end of the tracks and the animation and character setup section. Hope it was useful to you and even enjoyable. Okay, that's the end of the tape. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys got a lot of useful information out of the tape. I look forward to seeing all the new and exciting games that you create with these tools.